Welcome, everyone, to the Book Triangle podcast.
We're really thrilled to have you join us for another installment of our Navigating Modern India series.
Today, we're embarking on, well, a really crucial journey into Unit 4, Chapter 9 of Modern India by Spectrum. This particular chapter, it gives a general survey of the socio-cultural reform movements that, well, they truly swept across India during a really transformative era.
Absolutely transformative.
And it's a period that isn't just fascinating for anyone curious about India's past, It's also fundamental for understanding the very fabric of modern Indian society.
It really is.
Whether you're preparing for competitive examinations or maybe just looking to deepen your general knowledge.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is really to distill the most important insights from the Spectrum book on this.
Right.
We'll explore how Indian society, confronted by colonial rule and also grappling with its own internal challenges, responded with, well, remarkable intellectual and social awakening.
And awakenings, that's a good word for it.
Yeah. We aim to help you grasp the key figures, the powerful driving forces behind these changes, and, crucially, their lasting impact, quickly and thoroughly.
Okay.
So stay with us as we unpack this pivotal era of introspection and really profound change.
Right. So before we dive into the specific reform movements themselves and the, remarkable individuals who led them, it's really vital to understand the context.
The background.
Exactly. What was the prevailing state of Indian society and culture back in the 19th century that, well, necessitated such widespread and, frankly, profound reform?
What was the starting point?
Precisely. When we look back at this period, India, in many ways, it presented a picture of what was perceived, certainly by outsiders and increasingly by insiders, too, as a stagnant civilization.
Stagnant.
Yeah, and a static, almost decadent society in some respects. This perception was particularly stark when you contrasted it with, say, 18th century Europe.
Right, the Enlightenment era Europe, exactly,
right.
Which was then deeply influenced by the Enlightenment, new scientific thought, burgeoning industrialization. The gap, at least in the eyes of many observers, seemed pretty significant.
And the British presence, of course, that must have played a huge role in making that contrast really clear, didn't it? It wasn't purely an internal realization, surely.
Absolutely. The British conquest, you see, it was fundamentally different from earlier invasions India had experienced.
How so?
Well, unlike previous invaders who often settled within India's frontiers, maybe got absorbed by its culture or interacted with it, becoming part of the land, the British maintained a very distinct colonial presence.
Kept themselves separate.
Very much so. And they consistently highlighted what they perceived as India's backwardness and social ills, often, frankly, as a justification for their rule.
Ah, okay. Civilizing mission and all that.
Exactly, that narrative. So this external observation, coupled with a growing internal introspection among educated Indians, it really stirred the pot. It forced a critical self-assessment. And one of the most distressing aspects of the social conditions at the time and a central focus for the reformers was the truly deplorable position of women.
You read about this, and it's just shocking.
It really is. We see practices like female infanticide, which were tragically not uncommon in certain regions, leading to skewed gender ratios, obviously.
And child marriage, too.
Oh, child marriage was another widespread bane. You had young girls, often barely out of infancy, married off before they could even comprehend what marriage meant.
Terrible.
And polygamy was also prevalent, particularly a system known as Kulinism in Bengal.
Kulinism, what was that exactly?
It was a particularly exploitative practice where high-caste men, often elderly, would marry numerous, sometimes dozens, of very young girls.
Oh my goodness.
It led to tragic neglect, a complete lack of agency, and often very early widowhood for these young brides. Many hardly had a married life worth the name.
Unbelievable.
And then, of course, there was the horrific practice of sati.
Right, burning widows on the husband's pyre.
Exactly. Wives, particularly among higher castes, were expected to immolate themselves. It was a brutal reality, a very visible symbol of extreme patriarchal control, and it was something reformers would directly and courageously challenge.
So if I'm understanding this right, it wasn't just about the terrible position of women, horrific as that was. The rigidities of the caste system were also deeply entrenched. We're talking pervasive untouchability, hierarchical exploitation affecting millions. This sounds like a society that wasn't just stagnant, but deeply, deeply inequitable, ripe for fundamental change from within.
Precisely. The caste system was incredibly rigid. It led to severe forms of oppression, exclusion, denial of basic human dignity for those at the lower rungs.
Untouchability.
Untouchability meant entire communities were considered impure, subjected to unimaginable social isolation, economic deprivation. Just awful.
And religion itself? Had that become part of the problem too?
In many ways, yes. Religion had become intertwined with mechanical rituals, very deep-seated superstitions, and various forms of oppression, often moving away from its purer spiritual or ethical core.
So less about spirituality, more about rigid rules.
Often, yes. Many traditions, rather than fostering spiritual growth, encouraged a kind of fatalistic outlook. People were urged to focus on salvation after death rather than actively striving to improve their present world. Through social action, through rational thought.
Okay.
These were the core issues that really cried out for reform, creating a powerful impetus from within Indian society.
So the British presence, it certainly acted as a catalyst, didn't it? Highlighting these issues by comparison, maybe prompting some introspection. But the real impetus for reform, it truly came from within Indian society itself. This isn't just about external pressure, is it? It sounds much more like an internal regeneration, a self-awakening.
Precisely. That's a very important distinction to make. The socio-cultural regeneration of 19th century India was indeed occasioned by the colonial presence. It brought certain comparisons, new ideas, influences into sharper relief, no doubt.
Okay.
However, it was most certainly not created by it. The underlying drive for change was fundamentally an internal awakening, a desire for self-correction, for progress, a reevaluation of traditional practices in the face of new ideas. It was India looking at itself critically and deciding to evolve.
So what was the engine driving these changes from within then? Who were these reformers and what were the sort of fundamental intellectual principles guiding them as they set out to reshape what sounds like a deeply traditional society?
That's a crucial question. It tells us about the sources of this transformation. The social base, primarily, was the newly emerging Indian middle class and a growing cohort of educated intellectuals. Now, this group included both traditionally educated individuals, people deeply rooted in classical Indian learning, and also those who had gained a Western education, exposing them to Enlightenment thought, scientific reasoning, and so on.
So a mix of backgrounds.
A real mix.
Yeah.
We're talking about a diverse group. Government servants, professionals like doctors, lawyers, journalists, teachers, merchants.
Right.
What's truly fascinating, often a point of historical analysis, is the significant contrast between their progressive ideals, which often stemmed from this growing awareness and critical examination, and the predominantly non-middle class social base they were trying to reform.
So a disconnect there, potentially.
In some ways, yes, it was, you could say, a leadership driven somewhat from the top down, yet it was genuinely rooted in a desire for internal societal improvement, not just imposing ideas.
So these were the people, the pioneers, who saw the need for change. But what were the underlying intellectual principles? What gave unity and direction to these otherwise quite diverse movements?
Well, there were three core principles that provided a powerful ideological unity, kind of like guiding stars for these reformers.
Okay, what were they?
Rationalism, religious universalism, and humanism.
Right, let's start with rationalism. That sounds foundational.
It absolutely was foundational. It was this unwavering belief in the human intellect's capacity to think, to reason, to critically evaluate existing practices.
So logic over blind faith.
Essentially, yes. Judging social relevance and truth based on logic, evidence, not just inherited dogma. Raja Rammohan Roy, for instance, he really exemplified this. He firmly believed in the principle of causality, that everything has a cause, and saw demonstrability, the ability to prove something, as the sole criterion of truth.
Applied that to tradition itself.
Exactly. He evaluated contemporary practices like sati not just morally, but from the standpoint of their social utility, their human impact, fundamentally replacing unquestioning faith with critical rationality. And another prominent example of this rationalist approach is Akshay Kumar Dutt. He famously declared, "Rationalism is our only preceptor."
Wow, quite a statement.
Isn't it? He held that all natural and social phenomena could be analyzed and understood by purely mechanical processes, basically advocating for a scientific outlook on society.
Right.
And this commitment to reason, it led to significant questioning of long-held religious dogma. In the Brahma Samaj, for example, the infallibility of the Vedas was explicitly repudiated.
That sounds radical for the time.
It was absolutely radical. Similarly, the Aligarh movement, championed by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, emphasized reconciling Islamic teachings with modern needs. Sir Said even suggested religious tenets weren't immutable, they could be reinterpreted.
So adapting religion to the times.
Precisely. A profound departure, challenging centuries of ingrained, often uncritical belief.
Okay, that covers rationalism. What about religious universalism and humanism? How did they shape the reform agenda?
Well, religious universalism saw many reformers actively seeking common ground across different religions, advocating for a universal religion that transcended specific doctrines, specific rituals.
Finding the shared essence.
Exactly. A push toward a more inclusive spiritual understanding, looking past superficial differences. Humanism, on the other hand, placed paramount emphasis on social equality, on the equal worth of all individuals, regardless of background, caste, gender.
Right. That seems crucial for social reform.
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
This principle profoundly influenced the direction of social reform. It led to direct challenges against discriminatory practices, the demand for dignity and rights for all. And it's important to note how the direction of social reform kind of evolved over time. Initially, it was intrinsically linked to religious reform, primarily because many social ills like untouchability, child marriage, gender inequity drew their legitimacy, or at least a perceived justification, from religious interpretations, from texts.
So reformers had to engage with Scripture.
Often, yes. They had to demonstrate that these practices weren't truly sanctioned by the original faith. But later on, the social reform movement gradually sort of dissociated itself from religion.
Became more secular?
Exactly. Adopted a more secular approach, focusing on human rights, social justice, irrespective of religious sanction. Also, the early movements, they had a rather narrow social base.
We talked about that, upper and middle classes?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
Upper and middle classes, upper castes. These early reformers often tried to balance their modern views with existing conditions, trying not to alienate society completely, a delicate path. But over time, the movements aimed to penetrate the lower strata, seeking to revolutionize, reconstruct the social sphere from the ground up, bring about more fundamental, widespread change.
And this rational outlook, it also challenged things like caste hierarchy.
Absolutely. Challenged the rigid hereditary basis of caste distinctions. Even questioned the law of karma, which had long justified social hierarchy and fatalism.
How so?
Reformers urged people to focus on improving their present world, stressing action, progress, rather than solely striving for salvation after death. It was a shift towards agency, towards making a difference now.
Okay, let's unpack this with a truly towering figure. Someone who set the stage for so much that followed. Raja Rammohan Roy, often called the father of modern India, and rightly so, it seems. His impact was immense.
Immense is the right word. Raja Rammohan Roy, born in 1772, was an extraordinary figure, a true polymath, a visionary. He was a rationalist, a profound thinker, and a polyglot.
Mastered many languages, I read.
Numerous: Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, English, French, Latin, Greek, Hebrew. It wasn't just academic. It allowed him to deeply engage with diverse philosophical religious traditions, East and West.
Gave him a broad perspective.
Hugely broad. His vision was really ahead of its time. He believed in a universal religion that could unite humanity, transcend sectarian divides, and he advocated modernizing Indian society through Western education, scientific thought.
But not just copying the West.
No,
Right.
absolutely not, without abandoning India's rich cultural and spiritual heritage. He sought a synthesis, a fusion, not a wholesale adoption. And one of his most determined, most impactful efforts was his tireless crusade against the inhuman practice of sati.
Right, the widow burning.
He began his anti-sati struggle back in 1818, armed with a deep understanding of sacred Hindu texts.
Used their own texts against the practice.
Exactly. A brilliant strategy.
Mm.
He meticulously cited these texts to prove his contention that no religion, in its true uncorrupted essence, sanctioned burning widows alive, using religious authority itself to dismantle a religiously sanctioned evil.
Clever. And persuasive, presumably.
Very. Beyond scriptural arguments, he passionately appealed to humanity, to reason, to compassion. He personally visited cremation grounds to gather evidence, organized vigilance groups to try and prevent sati.
Direct action, too.
Yes, and he strategically worked within the colonial system, filing counter-petitions to the government to support a ban.
So, working on multiple fronts.
Relentlessly. And his efforts were ultimately rewarded when the government regulation of 1829 was passed by Governor-General Lord William Bentinck, declaring sati a crime throughout British India.
A monumental achievement.
Truly monumental for social reform. It showed the power of reasoned advocacy combined with direct action.
He wasn't just focused on sati, though, was he? His advocacy for women's rights seems to have extended much further, showing a more holistic view of women's liberation.
Absolutely. Rammohan Roy's vision for women's upliftment was genuinely comprehensive. He also campaigned vigorously against other prevalent social evils, child marriage, polygamy, recognizing how these practices diminished women's lives.
Right.
Simultaneously, he championed women's rights, advocating for widow remarriage, which was a radical idea for its time.
Still is in some places.
Indeed. And he argued for women's property rights, recognizing their economic vulnerability, their lack of autonomy. His holistic approach, social, legal, economic dimensions, was groundbreaking, set a powerful precedent. And then in 1828, he founded the Brahmo Sabha, later known as the Brahmo Samaj.
Okay, what was the core idea behind that?
It was established as a monotheistic movement, firmly based on reason, but also drawing spiritual inspiration from the philosophical tenets of the Vedas and Upanishads.
So, back to scriptures, but with reason.
Exactly. The Brahmo Samaj explicitly opposed idolatry, animal sacrifices, mechanical ritualism. It emphasized prayer, meditation, reading scriptures as paths to enlightenment, communion with the one God.
How influential was it?
Well, its direct influence was largely limited, initially at least, to Calcutta and Bengal more broadly. But it played a crucial role in paving the way for future reforms across India. It demonstrated that internal regeneration was possible through this synthesis of modern rationalism and purified spiritual traditions.
And then Debendranath Tagore stepped in, gave the Samaj new life, correct? How did his leadership further shape its direction?
Yes, his role was pivotal in sustaining and expanding the Brahmo Samaj after Rammohan Roy. Debendranath Tagore, father of the poet Rabindranath, joined in 1842. He infused new vitality into the movement, gave it a more definite form, steered it after Rammohan Roy's passing. He merged the Brahmo Samaj with his own Tattvabhutini Sabha, which he'd founded in 1839.
Okay, what did that Sabha do?
The Tattvabhutini Sabha and its influential journal, the Tattvabhutini Patrika, were dedicated to systematically studying India's past with a rational outlook and propagating Rammohan's ideas. This merger brought new strength, a wider membership, a more structured approach.
So more organized.
Definitely. Under Tagore's leadership, the revitalized Samaj actively supported widow remarriage, women's education, abolition of polygamy, even promoted temperance and improved conditions for peasants, the ryots, showing a broadening social conscience.
Interesting.
And he also staunchly opposed Christian missionaries, particularly their criticism of Hinduism and their conversion attempts, showcasing a strong sense of cultural rootedness, defending indigenous traditions alongside his commitment to reform.
Okay, so the spirit of reform starts spreading beyond Bengal. You mentioned Maharashtra gaining traction, another crucial hub.
Yes, Maharashtra emerged as another really key center for social and political awakening. And here we see the rise of the Prathana Samaj.
Prathana Samaj. How did that differ or build upon the Brahmo Samaj?
It built upon similar ideals, rationalism, social reform, but crucially, it adapted them to the local cultural and spiritual context of Maharashtra, gave it a local flavor, you could say.
So how did the Prathana Samaj actually come into being? What were its defining characteristics, its unique contributions?
Okay, so it was formally founded in Bombay in 1867 by Atmaram Pandaran, with significant guidance and inspiration from Keshab Chandra Sen, who, as we know, is a key figure in the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal.
Right.
Now, it's worth noting that a crucial precursor was a secret society called the Paramahansa Sabha, active from around 1849.
A secret society. Sounds intriguing.
It does. This earlier group was dedicated to spreading liberal ideas, encouraging the breakdown of caste and communal barriers, challenging orthodoxy through rational discourse. This groundwork helped lay a fertile intellectual soil for the Prathana Samaj. Many early members came from the Sabha.
Ah, okay. So it didn't come out of nowhere.
No, there was groundwork. And the movement gained immense popularity and achieved significant practical work, largely due to the tireless efforts of Mahadeo Govindranath.
M.G. Renaud, a huge name.
Absolutely, one of the intellectual giants of the Maharashtra Renaissance. Renaud joined the Samaj in 1870 and was instrumental in transforming it into an all-India movement, extending its influence far beyond Bombay.
Who else was involved?
Other notable leaders included R.G. Bhandarkar and G. Chandavarkar. Now, while the Samaj emphasized monotheism, its primary focus on the whole was less on purely religious doctrine and theological debate and more on concrete social reforms. This distinguished it somewhat from the Brahmo Samaj's initial emphasis.
More practical, less theological.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And it was also very much attached to the bhakti cult of Maharashtra. That devotional tradition provided a cultural and spiritual resonance for its message, helped it connect with a wider segment of the population through familiar traditions.
That's interesting. So less about abstract theological reform, more practical social change, but still within a familiar spiritual framework. What kind of social changes did they prioritize then?
Exactly. The Prathana Samaj relied heavily on education and persuasion. Rather than direct confrontation with Hindu orthodoxy, it was a more gradual reformist approach, aimed at winning hearts and minds.
Okay.
They had a clear four-point social agenda driving their efforts. Firstly, strong disapproval of the rigid caste system, advocating for a more egalitarian society.
Right.
Secondly, vigorous promotion of women's education, recognizing its vital role for societal progress. Thirdly, advocating for widow remarriage as a matter of human dignity and social justice. And fourthly, raising the age of marriage for both males and females to combat child marriage.
So hitting key social issues head on.
Directly. And figures like Dando Keshav Karv and Vishnu Shastri were prominent champions, working closely with Ranade. Karv and Ranade notably founded the widow remarriage movement and the Widows' Home Association.
A home for widows. That's practical support.
Very practical. The aim wasn't just remarriage, but also providing education, vocational training, so widows could become self-sufficient, empowering them to lead independent lives, alleviating their dire social and economic plight.
And we can't forget Balshastri Jambekar, the father of Marathi journalism. His contributions sound fundamental to this awakening, showing the power of the press even then.
Absolutely fundamental. Balshastri Jambekar, who lived from 1812 to 1846, was a true pioneer. He started the first Marathi newspaper, Darpan, in 1832.
Darpan.
Yes, which justly earned him the title Father of Marathi Journalism. He astutely used Darpan as a powerful tool to awaken people to social evils, promote the urgent cause of reform.
Using media for social change.
Exactly. Through his writings, he launched sharp attacks against Hindu orthodoxy, championed widow remarriage, demonstrating the burgeoning power of the press in driving social consciousness and change during this early reform period, influencing public opinion, mobilizing support. It shows how media was used right from the early 19th century.
While some movements focused on reform within existing structures, others pushed for more radical change. Even fiery change, you could say. The Young Bengal movement sounds like a prime example of that intense intellectual ferment.
It was an explosion, really. The Young Bengal movement, primarily active in the 1820s and 30s in Calcutta, inspired mainly by Henry Vivian Derozio.
Derozio, the teacher at Hindu College.
That's him, a charismatic, radical English teacher. Lived from 1809 to 1831, so died very young. He was Eurasian, born in Calcutta, and his unconventional teaching style just captivated his students.
What did he encourage?
He encouraged them to think freely, question all authority, embrace rationalism and humanism with a real passion. His followers, the Derosians, were known for their fiery critiques of orthodoxy, their advocacy for social reform, and strong, albeit sometimes maybe abstract and westernized, patriotic sentiments.
How did they express these ideas?
They channeled their energy through journals like Nanavesan, formed societies like the Society for the Acquisition of General Knowledge, intellectually bold, advocated women's rights, public education, vehemently criticized superstitions, blind faith.
Sounds powerful. Did they have much impact?
Well, despite their radicalism and intellectual prowess, their practical impact on society remained arguably limited.
Why is that?
Several factors, probably. They seem to lack a concrete long-term program for sustained social change. And crucially, they were somewhat disconnected from the broader masses.
An intellectual elite?
Perhaps too much so. Their ideas, while groundbreaking or maybe too advanced for the time, remained confined to an elite circle, struggled to translate into widespread action. They lit a fire of ideas, certainly, but it didn't fully ignite a mass movement.
It's fascinating how different reformers approached the same problems. In contrast to Young Bengal's maybe more abstract radicalism, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar seems to have achieved profound practical change, especially for women. What made his approach so effective?
Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, yes, lived 1820 to 1891, a true champion of women's rights and education in Bengal. He embodied intellectual courage combined with unwavering practical action. He led the movement for widow remarriage with an indomitable determination few could match. What made his approach particularly effective was his deep, unparalleled knowledge of ancient Hindu texts.
Ah, like Rammohan Roy with Sati.
Exactly. He meticulously cited scriptures, particularly the Parasara Smriti, to prove widow remarriage wasn't forbidden by religious law. stripping the orthodoxy of its primary religious justification for opposing it.
Scholarly activism.
Incredibly potent. His tireless efforts culminated in the passage of the Widow Remarriage Act of 1856, a landmark piece of legislation legally permitting Hindu widows to remarry across British India. Huge. Beyond this, he was a prolific educator, philanthropist, opened numerous schools for girls, including the first government-run girls' school in Calcutta, vehemently advocated women's education as a cornerstone of progress, fought against polygamy, child marriage too, addressing multifaceted issues facing women from a deep sense of compassion and justice. Now, moving back to Maharashtra, we encounter another truly revolutionary figure, Jyotiba Phule, often affectionately known as Mahatma Phule.
Mahatma Phule, right, from a lower caste background, wasn't he?
Yes, born 1827, passed 1890, a prominent social reformer who hailed from the Mali community, considered a lower caste. This personal experience gave him a unique, empathetic, and powerful perspective on caste-based oppression, made him one of the earliest, most vocal critics of the caste system from within.
And Phule founded the Satyashodhak Samaj to tackle the caste system head-on, didn't he? What was its unique mission and impact?
He absolutely did. In 1873, Jyotiba Phule founded the Satyashodhak Samaj Truth Seekers Society. Its explicit, radical purpose was promoting caste equality, uplifting the lower castes, particularly the untouchables, who face the most severe discrimination, exclusion, indignity.
So directly challenging the hierarchy.
Directly. Phule was an ardent, fearless critic of Brahminical dominance. He viewed the entrenched caste system not just as a social hierarchy, but as a form of social slavery, a systematic denial of basic human dignity and rights, perpetuated by upper castes for their own benefit. His critique was sharp, direct, unapologetic.
And he worked on women's education, too.
Passionately. He recognized true social reform couldn't happen without empowering women, with the invaluable, courageous help of his equally dedicated wife, Savitribai Phule.
Savitribai Phule, another key figure.
Absolutely. Together, they opened one of India's very first girls' schools in Pune in 1851. Despite facing immense social opposition, ostracization, just incredible courage. He was also a trailblazer in the widow remarriage movement in Maharashtra. Demonstrated his commitment by opening a home for widows in 1854, providing a safe haven, a chance at a new life.
So practical help again.
Yes. For his monumental pioneering contributions, especially for the marginalized, he was posthumously awarded the title Mahatma in 1888, a testament to the profound, enduring impact of his work on the struggle for social justice. His efforts were radical, directly challenging the established order, laying crucial groundwork for future grassroots movements aimed at dismantling caste hierarchies. Let's broaden our view now. Look at other influential figures, nascent organizations who shaped social consciousness across India, contributing to this tapestry of reform in unique, often interconnected ways.
Okay, starting with Gopalari Deshmukh, known as Lokahitawadi. He sounds like a real intellectual giant who prioritized societal restructuring.
He was indeed a remarkable figure. Gopalari Deshmukh lived 1823 to 1892. A leading rationalist, social reformer from Maharashtra. Interestingly, he held the post of a judge under the British Raj.
Gave him unique perspective, maybe?
Possibly. But his real passion, his profound influence, stemmed from his prolific writing for the weekly Prabhakar, under his famous pen name, Lokahitawadi,
Meaning?
one who is interested in the welfare of the people. Through his influential writings, he relentlessly advocated a fundamental reorganization of Indian society, based on rational principles, modern, humanistic, secular values.
Strong stuff.
Very. He launched strong, uncompromising attacks against Hindu orthodoxy, a staunch supporter of social and religious equality, particularly campaigning against the evils of the caste system, the superstitious practices stifling progress. He famously stated, with remarkable boldness for his time, if religion does not sanction social reform, then change religion.
Wow. That really underscores his commitment to reason over dogma.
Powerfully. He also initiated another weekly, Hitashu, and was involved in founding other influential periodicals like Jam Prakash, Indu Prakash, Lokahitawadi, all platforms for his progressive ideas. Another significant, equally rationalist voice from Maharashtra was Gopal Ganesh Agarkar, lived 1856 to 1895.
Agarkar, associated with Tilak initially.
Yes, he served as editor of Kesari, which he co-founded with Tilak, later founded his own paper, Sitarak. Agarkar held a distinct, often debated view on the hierarchy of reform.
What was that?
He passionately advocated that social reform must take precedence over political reform.
Social before political. Why?
He believed a society riddled with internal ills, Caste discrimination, gender inequality was ill-equipped for effective political action or genuine self-governance. Fix the house first, basically.
Makes sense.
He was a vocal opponent of child marriage, the caste system, strongly emphasized the paramount importance of women's education, saw it as essential for society's advancement, moral upliftment.
So we're seeing not just individual thinkers, but also the emergence of more organized associations, like the Servants of India Society. This marks a shift, doesn't it? From individual efforts to more structured collective action.
Precisely. The Servants of India Society, founded in 1905 by the moderate nationalist leader Gopal Krishna Gokhale in Bombay. It represented a significant step towards a more institutionalized, dedicated approach to social service, nation building.
What was its main aim?
Its primary aim was to train what Gokhale called national missionaries, specifically for the selfless service of India, promoting true patriotism among them.
National missionaries, interesting term.
It is. Members had to take solemn vows of service, dedicating their lives entirely to the cause of the nation, often working on a meager allowance, tirelessly for social reform. A profound call to selflessness, committed, organized service, recognizing social upliftment was integral to national progress.
And following that, in 1911, the Social Service League, founded by N. Joshi.
Yes, and M. Joshi, a prominent labor leader. This organization focused on an even more grassroots practical approach, aiming to secure better working and living conditions for the masses, particularly industrial workers.
So direct help for working people.
Exactly. Directly addressed immediate societal needs, organizing adult education classes, setting up libraries, providing medical facilities, conducting various forms of social work night schools for workers, reading rooms. These associations highlight a crucial shift from purely intellectual discourse to concrete, organized, sustained efforts for societal betterment, reaching deeper into the fabric of Indian life.
What's fascinating here is how many of these reforms were deeply rooted in religious revival. It wasn't always about abandoning tradition, but often aiming to purify, strengthen existing traditions. The Ramakrishna movement seems like a beautiful example of this blend, spiritual awakening and social action.
It truly is a prime example. The Ramakrishna movement was inspired by the profound spiritual experiences and universal teachings of Ramakrishna Paramhansa.
The mystic and priest?
Yes, at the Kali Temple in Dakshinswar, lived 1836 to 1886. Ramakrishna, through his own spiritual journey embracing various paths, advocated the essential unity of all religions.
Jatomat, Tatopath.
Exactly. As many faiths, so many paths. Emphasizing that all sincere spiritual paths, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, others, ultimately lead to the same divine truth. His teaching centered on intense devotion and the revolutionary idea that service to humanity is, in essence, service to God.
Translating spirituality into action.
Precisely. Turning spiritual awakening into concrete social action.
And his chief disciple, Swami Vivekananda, he truly took this message global, didn't he? Became an ambassador for Indian spirituality, a rallying figure for Indian self-pride.
Indeed. Swami Vivekananda, originally Narendranath Dutta, lived 1863 to 1902. Ramakrishna's chief disciple, became a global figure after his electrifying address at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893.
A famous speech.
Absolutely captivating. He held audiences spellbound with his powerful message of tolerance, the universality of Vedanta philosophy, presenting Hinduism not as some sectarian belief, but as a profound, inclusive spiritual truth relevant to all humanity. A huge moment for projecting Indian thought globally.
And he founded the Ramakrishna Mission.
Yes, in 1897. An organization dedicated to carrying on humanitarian, social work based on Ramakrishna's ideals of practical spirituality.
What kind of work did they do?
The mission's core philosophy was service to man is service to God, which Vivekananda famously articulated as Daridra Narayana Seva, service to the poor is service to God. So they engaged in extensive work, education schools, colleges, relief efforts during famines, natural calamities, offering medical services, embodying practical spirituality, social responsibility.
And his message?
Vivekananda preached a powerful message of strength, self-reliance, fearlessness, urging Indians to shed weaknesses, overcome fatalism, embrace their inherent spiritual and intellectual might.
Quite empowering.
Very. He also coined the significant political message, India for the Indians, which resonated deeply with burgeoning nationalist sentiments, effectively bridging the spiritual with the national, inspiring a generation towards self-belief and action.
And then we have the Arya Samaj, which took a rather distinct approach, didn't it? Looking back to the Vedic age for inspiration, seemingly less about universalism, maybe more about an assertive purification of Hinduism.
That's a key distinction, yes. It reflects the diverse ways religious traditions responded to the challenges of the 19th century. Dayananda Saraswati, original name Mula Shankara, lived 1824–1883, founded the Arya Samaj in Bombay in 1875. Headquarters later moved to Lahore, gained immense popularity, particularly in Punjab, North India. Its motto was a resounding, "Back to the Vedas."
Back to the Vedas. What did that mean in practice?
Dayananda advocated for a pure, uncorrupted Vedic Hinduism, meticulously rejecting what he saw as later accretions, corruptions, things like idolatry, polytheism, mechanical ritualism, the rigid caste system.
Saw those as deviations.
Exactly. Deviations from the true Vedic religion. He asserted the Vedas in their original form contained all truth. Society should be reformed according to their rational, egalitarian principles.
So against caste and child marriage, too.
Strongly condemned social evils like child marriage and untouchability. Saw them as contrary to genuine Vedic ideals of human equality. The Arya Samaj also promoted cow protection, which became significant.
Right.
And one of its most distinctive, often controversial initiatives was the Shuddhi movement.
Shuddhi, purification.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
This movement aimed to reconvert Hindus who had converted to Islam or Christianity back to the Hindu faith.
Had socio-political implications, surely.
Absolutely. Not merely religious, it asserted Hindu identity, unity against the backdrop of colonial-era conversions.
And education. National.
The Arya Samaj strongly stressed female education, recognizing its importance, and actively promoted a nationalistic spirit, encouraging self-reliance, pride in Indian heritage. His teachings were summarized in his influential book, Sacharth Prakash, The Light of Truth.
So quite different from the Ramakrishna Mission's universalism. More assertive about a specific vision of Hinduism.
Precisely. Less about interreligious unity, more about an assertive purification, consolidation, and revival of a specific purified vision of Hinduism.
The landscape of reform was clearly rich with diverse efforts. Extending beyond these major Hindu movements to encompass other communities, interreligious associations, it really shows how pervasive the spirit of reform truly was.
Indeed. It wasn't confined to one group. A notable example is the Seva Sadan, founded in 1908 in Bombay.
Who founded that?
Baramji M. Malabari, a prominent Parsi social reformer and journalist, and Dayaram Gidamal. This organization focused primarily on improving the conditions of women, particularly through education, providing care for widows and deserted women.
An inter-community effort, then.
Yes, demonstrating that the impulse for social upliftment transcended religious boundaries. Then we have the Dev Samaj. Established in Lahore in 1887 by Shiv Narayan Agnihotri, he'd previously been in the Brahmo Samaj.
Okay, what was their focus?
This movement advocated a very strict moral code,
Yeah.
campaigned vigorously against practices like bribery, gambling, consuming intoxicants, placed strong emphasis on spiritual education, dedicated service to humanity, aiming for a morally regenerated society where self-discipline was paramount.
But not all movements were progressive in the sense of embracing modern ideas, were they? Some were designed to resist change, defend orthodoxy, like the Dharma Sabha.
That's a crucial point, yes. Highlights the complex dynamics. The Dharma Sabha, founded in Calcutta, 1830, by Radhakant Deb, it was indeed a conservative organization, emerged specifically to oppose the Brahmo Samaj and progressive reforms like abolishing sati.
So a reaction against reform.
Definitely. Its primary aim was protecting Hindu orthodoxy from what it perceived as radical changes, incursions. Interestingly, though, even this conservative body paradoxically supported Western education.
Really? Why?
Complex. Perhaps they saw the utility of modern learning in certain spheres, maybe to better defend their traditional views using modern tools. It shows the nuanced relationship with modernity. Similarly, the Hara Dharma Mahamandala, founded in Banaras, 1902, by Orthodox Hindu leaders like Madan Mohan Malaviya, Deen Dayal Sharma, also aimed to defend Orthodox Hinduism against both reformist movements and Christian missionary activities, sought to popularize ancient Hindu scriptures, practices, reinforcing traditional beliefs, fostering pride in traditional Hinduism. These groups represented the powerful pushback against rapid change. Moving to a more spiritual, less confrontational path, we find the Radha Swami movement, founded 1861 by Tulsi Ram, also known as Shiv Dayal Sahib in Agra.
What did they emphasize?
Belief in a supreme being, the crucial need for a living guru for spiritual guidance, and simple moral living through spiritual practices like Surat Shab yoga meditation on inner sound and light, promoted universal brotherhood, underlying unity of all religions, focusing on inner spirituality, devotion as the path to truth, appealing to a different spiritual sensibility. Finally, we turn to the Theosophical movement, an interesting one founded outside India.
Yes, in New York, 1875, by Blavatsky and Olcott.
That's right. They came to India in 1882, establishing their international headquarters at Adyar, near Madras. Drew significant inspiration from ancient Indian philosophy, Vedanta, Buddhism, and various mystical traditions worldwide.
What were their core beliefs?
Core tenets included universal brotherhood, investigating unexplained laws of nature, exploring latent psychic powers in humans. The Theosophical movement became notably allied with the Hindu Renaissance
How so?
because it presented ancient Indian wisdom in a way that resonated with educated Indians and Western seekers alike. Arrived in India 1893. With her powerful oratory dedication, she greatly popularized the movement across the subcontinent. Her efforts weren't just theoretical. She established the Central Hindu College in Benares in 1898.
Which became BHU later.
Exactly. It uniquely combined teaching Hindu religion and philosophy with modern Western scientific subjects. It became the nucleus for Benares Hindu University in 1916, a major institution. Annie Besant also dedicated considerable energy to women's education, demonstrated the movement's practical social impact, its commitment to India's holistic development, showing how spiritual universalism could blend with practical social and educational reform. The struggle for social equality gained significant momentum, with movements specifically addressing the plight of the marginalized, particularly the depressed classes and those in southern India where unique social dynamics, Brahminical dominance were particularly pronounced.
Let's start with the Sri Narayana Guru Dharma Parpalana, or SNDP, movement in Kerala. This sounds like a powerful assertion of dignity from within a marginalized community.
It was indeed a truly transformative movement. The SNDP movement, founded in 1903 by Sri Narayana Guru, who lived 1856-1928, a powerful force for uplifting the Ajava community in Kerala.
Considered a backward caste.
Yes, subjected to severe discrimination, untouchability. Sri Narayana Guru's profound revolutionary message was one caste, one religion, one God for mankind.
Powerful slogan.
Simple yet powerful. Challenged the very foundation of the multi-caste hierarchical Hindu society. He fiercely fought against entrenched caste discrimination, especially restrictive temple entry rules barring lower castes.
What did he do practically?
A key part of his work involved constructing temples open to all, explicitly without caste distinctions, challenging the very foundations of the hierarchical system, creating inclusive spaces for worship. His impact wasn't just spiritual, it was fundamentally socio-political, empowering a historically suppressed community. Moving to Mysore, the Vocaliga Sangha was founded in 1906, specifically to promote the interests of the Vocaliga community, an important agricultural caste in the region. This demonstrates how caste-based movements were emerging, asserting rights, interests of specific communities, often countering Brahmin dominance in administration, education.
And in the Madras presidency, we see the justice movement, which seems to have directly challenged the existing power structures there. What were its goals and impact?
The justice movement began in 1916 in Madras presidency, initially operated as the South Indian Liberal Federation, founded by prominent non-Brahmin figures like C.M. Mudaliar, T.M. Nair, P. Tyagaraja Chetty.
Our main objective?
To secure non-Brahmin representation in government services, legislative bodies, directly challenging the disproportionate Brahminical dominance in education, administration, politics prevalent then.
Arguing Brahmins held too much power.
Exactly. Argued Brahmins, despite being a minority, held a near monopoly on government jobs, educational opportunities, sought equitable representation for non-Brahmins, laying groundwork for a more inclusive political landscape in the South. Building on this, we have the incredibly radical self-respect movement, founded in 1925 by E.V. Ramaswamy Periyar in Tamil Nadu.
Periyar, a very influential figure.
Hugely. This movement was revolutionary, uncompromising in its aims. It sought to vehemently denounce Brahminical Hinduism, the caste system, even religion itself, asserting the inherent dignity of self-respect for all non-Brahmins.
Promoted rationalism.
Atheism.
Yes, rationalism, atheism. Advocated a complete societal overhaul, rejecting traditional hierarchies, superstitious practices, championed women's rights, famously organized self-respect marriages.
Without Brahmin priests.
Exactly. Symbolizing a deliberate break from Orthodox traditions, asserting individual autonomy. His movement profoundly influenced Dravidian politics and identity in Tamil Nadu. The temple entry movement seems like a crucial element, directly challenging the physical manifestation of untouchability, asserting the right to equality in public spaces.
Absolutely. It represented significant, often courageous efforts by various reformers across India to allow marginalized communities, particularly Dalits, into temples they'd historically been barred from.
Key figures involved.
In Kerala, key figures included K. Kalappan, the poet Subramaniam Tirumambu, the singing sword of Kerala P. Krishna Pillai A.K. Gopalan. The Guruvayur Satyagraha in 1931 was a pivotal event.
What happened there?
Garnered widespread attention, support through nonviolent direct action against caste-based exclusion. These sustained efforts culminated in a landmark achievement, the Travancore Maharaja's proclamation in 1936.
Which did what?
Dramatically opened all government-controlled temples to all Hindus, regardless of caste. Similar progressive steps were taken by C. Rajagopalachari's administration in Madras in 1938.
And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's efforts here?
Monumental. Dr. Ambedkar, a towering figure against caste discrimination, fierce advocate for Dalit rights, made huge efforts highlighting Dalit grievances nationally, established the Bahishkrit Hitakarini Sabha in 1924.
With the motto?
Educate, agitate, and organize. Powerful. Ambedkar tirelessly advocated for temple entry rights, for Dalits viewing it as fundamental, and for their political representation. Recognizing true liberation required both social and political empowerment. His approach combined intellectual rigor with mass mobilization, profoundly shaping the discourse on caste in India. Finally, the Indian Social Conference, founded 1887 by M.G. Ranade and Raghunath Rao, another significant platform.
What was unique about it?
It uniquely met annually alongside the Indian National Congress, ensuring social reform remained on the national agenda alongside political aspirations.
Kept the issues linked.
Yes. Dedicated exclusively to social reform, its agenda focused on crucial issues, promoting intercaste marriages, advocating abolition of child marriage, working towards prohibiting polygamy. These movements collectively demonstrate the deep, diverse efforts to transform India into a more equitable, just society from within, laying critical groundwork for the independent nation.
The Muslim community also experienced its own set of internal reform and revivalist movements, often responding to internal needs, external pressures like British rule, reforms in other communities. It shows no community was static.
That's a critical point, yes. No community was monolithic or unchanging. One of the earliest, most significant movements within the Muslim community was the Wahhabi Waliullah movement.
A revivalist movement.
Essentially, yes, Islamic revivalist. In India, founded by Syed Ahmed of Rai Bareilly, inspired by Abdul Wahhab of Saudi Arabia and Shah Waliullah of Delhi, Syed Ahmed vehemently condemned what he saw as Western influence, innovations creeping into Islamic practice in India.
Advocated a return to
pure Islam, society as it existed in the Prophet's time in Arabia. He was even acclaimed as the desired leader, the Imam.
How did they operate?
Established a countrywide organization, elaborate secret code for operations, working under spiritual vice-regents, caliphs. Sithana, in the northwestern tribal belt, was chosen as a base for military operations. Patna served as an important center in India, with missions spreading across Hyderabad, Madras, Bengal, UP, Bombay.
Military operations, jihad.
They declared jihad, yes, initially against the Sikh kingdom of Punjab, aiming to convert Darul Harb, territory of war chaos, into Darul Islam, land of Islam. After the defeat of the Sikh ruler and Punjab's incorporation into the East India Company's dominion in 1849, the English dominion became the sole target of the Wahhabis' attacks, shifting focus to anti-British resistance, highlighting their complex position, fighting for religious purity and against foreign rule.
And this was followed by movements like Titu Mir's, more localized impact, especially among peasants, showing how religious ideas translated into social action.
Yes. Titu Mir's movement in the 1830s was another important regional manifestation, particularly in Bengal. Mir Nithar Ali, known as Titu Mir, was a disciple of Sayyid Ahmed Barelvi, the Wahhabi founder. Titu Mir adopted Wahhabism, advocated strict adherence to Sharia, organized Muslim peasants in Bengal against primarily Hindu landlords and British indigo planters who were often oppressive.
A mix of religious and economic grievances.
Seems so. While British records often portrayed it as highly militant, solely religious, some sources suggest the major confrontation with British police only occurred in the last year of his life, 1831, when he was killed in action. Highlights the intersection of religious revivalism with agrarian grievances. Closely related was the Farisi movement, active 1838-1857, founded by Shariatullah in Faridpur, eastern Bengal.
What did they advocate?
Strict adherence to Farisi duties, the obligatory duties of Islam, like prayers, fasting. His son, Dadi Mian, later led the movement, extended its scope to include resistance against Hindu landlords who imposed a controversial beard tax on Farisis.
A beard tax?
Yes. Adding an economic, social dimension, They also resisted paying illegal cesses to landlords. Then we have the Ahmadiyya movement, founded 1889 by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in Qadian, Punjab.
This one took a different approach, more universalist.
Yes, distinct, more universalist. Advocated a universal religion based on teachings of all major faiths. Ghulam Ahmad even proclaimed himself a messiah, an incarnation of Lord Krishna, seeking to bridge religious divides.
Wow.
The Ahmadiyya movement actively defended Islam against attacks from Christian missionaries, Hindu revivalists, while also promoting education, intellectual engagement, social purity among followers, emphasized peace, nonviolence, tolerance, a more syncretic modern interpretation of Islam.
Here's where it gets really interesting with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and the Aligarh movement. A figure often seen as absolutely crucial for modern Muslim education, their integration into the colonial system.
Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, yes, lived 1817-1898. Undoubtedly the most prominent leader of Muslim socio-religious reform in 19th century India, emerged as a powerful voice advocating modern education among Muslims.
Why did he feel that was so important?
Believed it was absolutely essential for them to catch up with their Hindu counterparts, who had gained an advantage from an earlier start in Western education, access to government employment.
So education for progress?
Exactly. His most significant contribution was founding the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College in Aligarh in 1875.
Which became Aligarh Muslim University.
Precisely, AMU. This institution became a beacon of modern education for Muslims in India, fostering a new generation of educated professionals.
And his approach to Islam?
Sir Syed emphasized reconciling Islamic teachings with modern needs, argued certain religious tenets weren't immutable, could be reinterpreted in light of modern scientific thought, Western knowledge.
And politics. His stance on the Congress.
Initially, he opposed active Muslim political activity, participation in the Indian National Congress, feared it would invite hostility from the government, hinder the community's educational, economic progress, which he prioritized.
A cautious approach.
Cautious, yes. However, it's also important to note, and this is a complex, controversial aspect of his legacy, that in his enthusiasm to promote Muslim educational and employment interests, he sometimes allowed himself to be used by the colonial government to create a division between Hindus and Muslims.
Okay, so complicated.
Very. His efforts represent both a progressive push for modernity within Islam and a cautious, sometimes divisive approach to political engagement. Now, in contrast to Aligarh's modernizing, somewhat accommodationist approach, we have the Deoband School, Darul Uloom, founded 1866.
By Nanartavi and Gangohi?
Yes, at Deoband, Saharanpur, UP. This was an orthodox Muslim movement, emphasized traditional Islamic religious education, moral regeneration of the Muslim community through adherence to scriptural teachings.
So preserving tradition against Western influence.
Exactly. Primary aim was preserving pure Islamic teachings, traditions amidst growing colonial influence, Western education, acted as a stronghold of religious conservatism, a bulwark against encroaching Western values, fostered a spirit of resistance to colonial rule, but through religious reform and education. Interestingly, Shibli Numani, a prominent scholar who supported Deoband, held a somewhat different view on education.
How so?
While aligned with Deoband's religious emphasis, he favored including English language, European sciences in the education system, believed they were necessary for Muslims to prosper in the modern world.
A synthesis again?
He aimed for one. Founded Nadwatul Ulama and Darul Uloom in Lucknow in 1894-96. Aiming for a synthesis of traditional Islamic sciences and modern knowledge, significantly, Shibli Numani believed in Congress ideals, advocated Hindu-Muslim cooperation for a united state.
Offering a bridge?
Yes, a bridge between Orthodox Islamic thought and broader nationalist aspirations, highlighting the internal diversity of thought within Muslim reform. Beyond the Hindu and Muslim communities, other significant communities in India also embarked on journeys of internal reform, revitalization, adapting modern ideas to their unique cultural, religious contexts. Shows the widespread nature of this self-awakening.
Let's start with the Parsi reform movements. The Parsis, a relatively smaller but highly influential community, they seem to have embraced Westernization quite readily compared to others.
They certainly did. The Parsi community, known for its entrepreneurial spirit, engagement with trade, commerce, early adoption of Western education, was indeed among the first to initiate its own comprehensive reform movements. The Radha Mamazdas Sabha, or Religious Reform Association, was founded in Bombay 1851 by a group of prominent English-educated Parsis. Key figures included Naroji Ferdowji, Dadapai Naroji, the Grand Old Man of India, Karakama, S.S. Bengali.
What was their stated objective?
Clearly stated as the regeneration of the social conditions of the Parsis, and the restoration of the Zoroastrian religion to its pristine purity, aiming to rid it of rituals, practices they consider irrational or corrupt.
How did they spread their message?
Through their influential newspaper, Rastagaftar, literally truth teller, became a powerful mouthpiece, actively worked to reform Parsi religious rituals, practices, redefined the Parsi creed to align with more modern, rational interpretations of Zoroastrianism.
And social reforms, especially for women.
Yes, significant attempts to uplift the status of Parsi women, removing the purdah system, raising marriage age, rigorously promoting education basic literacy to higher learning. As a result, Parsis gradually emerged as one of the most westernized, educated, progressive sections of Indian society, demonstrating how a small community could lead in social change.
And the Sikhs also had their own crucial reform efforts, particularly the Singh Sabha movement. What were its key objectives? How did it impact Sikh identity?
The Sikh community, like others, couldn't remain untouched by the rising tide of rationalist progressive ideas, especially with various proselytizing movements active in Punjab. The Singh Sabha movement was founded at Amritsar in 1873 with a clear twofold objective.
Okay, what were the two objectives?
Firstly, making modern Western education accessible to Sikhs. To achieve this, the Sabha established a widespread network of Khalsa schools throughout Punjab, primary schools to colleges, ensuring Sikh youth had access to contemporary knowledge, opportunities for government employment.
And the second objective?
Crucially, countering the proselytizing activities of Christian missionaries, as well as efforts by Brahmo Samajists, Arya Samajists, Muslim Alvis, seeking converts within the Sikh community.
Defending the faith, strengthening identity.
Exactly. In this direction, the Singh Sabha movement systematically rejected practices considered against the Guru's core teachings, sought to establish rites, customs strictly consistent with Sikh doctrine, thereby strengthening, purifying Sikh identity. It also aimed to reorganize Sikhs under a unified structure, Dal Khalsa, to unite them politically, culturally, economically, fostering a stronger sense of community, collective action. These movements across various communities highlight the widespread, diverse nature of internal reform during this transformative period, showing each community grappling with modernity, tradition in its own unique way.
So, after surveying these incredibly diverse movements, from Raja Rammohan Roy's groundbreaking initiatives to Periyar's radical critiques, from the Brahmo Samaj's intellectual ferment to the Aligarh movement's educational thrust, what's the big picture? What was their lasting impact, both positive and, well, perhaps negative, on the trajectory of modern India?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Understanding the legacy. On the positive side, these reform movements brought about an incredible intellectual awakening across India.
Yeah.
They fundamentally emphasized the human intellect's capacity to think, reason, question, challenging centuries of blind faith, uncritical acceptance, superstition.
Empowering the mind.
Absolutely. By meticulously weeding out corrupt elements from religious beliefs, practices, simplifying rituals, reformers enabled their followers to effectively counter the official taunts from colonialists, who often portrayed Indian religion's society as inherently decadent, irrational, inferior. This internal purification fostered a renewed sense of pride, self-respect.
Important psychologically.
Hugely important. Furthermore, these movements provided the rising middle classes with much-needed cultural roots to cling to, essential in reducing the sense of humiliation, cultural inferiority from foreign conquest. They actively promoted a modern, this worldly, secular, rational outlook, leading to a basic, albeit gradual, change in traditional notions of pollution and purity, fostering a more egalitarian social ethic.
And it wasn't just blind westernization.
No, critically it wasn't. Reformers aimed at genuine modernization. By critically integrating modern ideas into existing Indian cultural spiritual streams. To that extent, these movements effectively ended India's cultural, intellectual isolation from the rest of the world, fostering critical engagement with global thought while fiercely retaining an Indian core.
And the tangible changes. For women, caste.
Most importantly, yes, significant tangible changes in the position of women, legal abolition of sati, promoting widow remarriage, expanding women's education, opening new opportunities. They vigorously attacked untouchability, challenged caste rigidity, leading to a slow but sure erosion of these oppressive structures. And importantly, many movements carried strong nationalist undertones, working for mass upliftment, fostering pride in Indian heritage, laying crucial groundwork for later political movements, the eventual struggle for independence.
That's a powerful and undeniably positive legacy, marking a profound shift in Indian society. But as with any major historical phenomenon, there were also limitations, maybe unintended consequences. The path to progress is rarely straight, is it?
Absolutely not. One of the primary limitations, often debated by historians, was their limited social base.
We touched on this. Mostly urban, educated classes.
Predominantly, yes.
Uh-huh.
Educated urban middle and upper classes, largely upper castes. They struggled to deeply, uniformly penetrate the vast masses, particularly in rural areas. Limited their reach, impact on the deepest social strata, the most marginalized, ideas changing at the top, but maybe slower change in everyday life for many. Secondly, the modernization they introduced was often partial, selective.
How so?
Some reforms abolishing sati, promoting education, readily adopted. Others, particularly those challenging fundamental power structures or deeply ingrained customs, were resisted. This sometimes created a phenomenon of colonial modernization.
Colonial modernization.
Yeah, where change was introduced in some areas but deliberately blocked or distorted in others. Sometimes to serve British administrative interests, ironically perpetuating certain traditional practices that reinforce social control. And here's where it gets really nuanced. A more complex, unintended negative aspect emerges. Communalism.
How did reform movements contribute to that?
Well, while many genuinely aimed at unity, social harmony, some perhaps inadvertently reinforced communalism. By focusing intensely on specific religious identities, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Parsi, or by zealously defending orthodoxy within their faiths, some movements inadvertently contributed to the burgeoning communal consciousness, divisions that would later plague Indian society. For instance, the Shuddhi movement, while aimed at reconversion, could also be perceived as aggressive by other communities. This heightened focus on distinct religious identities, even for positive internal reform, could sometimes be exploited by external forces or lead to internal fragmentation, making broader pan-Indian unity a more fragile endeavor.
So strengthening internal identity sometimes weakened broader unity.
That's one way to look at the potential downside, yes. And finally, despite commendable efforts for unity, social justice, the reform efforts sometimes struggle to achieve lasting unity across diverse religious groups, beliefs, led to a somewhat fragmented reform landscape rather than a single cohesive movement. This fragile unity became a significant challenge for the broader nationalist movement in the decades to come, as leaders grappled with uniting a diverse populace that had also undergone internal distinct reform processes.
What an incredible journey, though, through a period of just immense social and intellectual ferment in India. From Raja Rammohan Roy's courageous fight against sati, using reason and scripture, to Swami Vivekananda's inspiring message of universalism and selfless service, and from Jyotiba Phule's groundbreaking struggle for caste equality from the grassroots to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's crucial push for modern Muslim education. These movements laid truly crucial groundwork for what would become modern India. Shows change comes from many places, many approaches.
Indeed. They vividly showed that even under the formidable shadow of colonial rule, Indian society was not static or passive. It was actively engaged in deep introspection, critical self-assessment, a profound process of transformation, often driven by its own internal dynamics. Understanding these complex reform movements is absolutely key to appreciating the intricate tapestry of modern India. Its long, often challenging journey towards self-awareness, self-determination. These aren't just historical facts. They're foundational stories of how a society grapples with its own identity and its future.
Absolutely. And this is just Chapter 9 of Modern India by Spectrum. We will definitely continue to cover all the chapters in our ongoing Navigating Modern India series. There's so much more to explore, so many more insights to uncover from this pivotal text. That will not only aid your competitive exam preparation, but also enrich your understanding of this incredible nation.
So please do stay tuned to the Book Triangle podcast for more insightful sessions. We hope they'll help you navigate the rich and complex history of modern India, whether you're preparing for those competitive exams or simply feeding your insatiable curiosity.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this exploration. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.